So who are you and what do you do?
Mitch, I am Dan Pontefract. I'm the opposite of my last name. I'm trying to build bridges, not break them. Ponte bridge, fract, break, broken bridge. I'm a leadership strategist, semi-author, I suppose. I say semi because I'm not sure I'm very good at it. I help organizations and people become better versions of themselves.
You may not consider yourself a good or great author. I do, but if anything, you are prolific, which we would both agree to, right? Because you have a new book out called Work Life Bloom.
Yeah, I mean, there's always an itch to scratch. You and I are cut from the same cloth, I shall say, black cloth. And there's always something to investigate, I think, Mitch.
Well, it's interesting that I would agree with that. I don't know anymore if book is the format of my dealing in ideas and thoughts. I haven't published in a very long time, obviously. I'd be curious your perspective on that. Why books at this point? What do you find that they're doing for you? Is it an issue that you just can't change old habits? What are you thinking on books?
Yeah, really, I should read more of Charles Duhigg's Power of Habit and not write books, right? Create that habit. Yeah, the itch is itchy, right? And so when I have something in my head, it feels like a talk or an article or a LinkedIn post or what have you just seems so insufficient that I really have to dig deep. And when I end up digging deep, books allow me the chance to really meet other people whom have experienced it, might be experience it in the moment. And then, of course, whether I'm doing my research and or looking at other people's research, it just becomes just a wonderful cauldron of learning for me. So quite frankly, it's probably the autodidact in me. It's the in perpetual wanting to grow mode of Dan. And so maybe I guess, Mitch, I write for me and then they just come out in books. I don't know.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that in this day and age. I think those who create for themselves are clearly trying to create something that they haven't found out in the world. And potentially there are others who feel the same way as you do. So it's the right strategy as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Good.
Good. Let's talk about work, Dan. Let's talk about work life bloom and what's been happening in the world. I want you to explain the premise of the book, but I'm going to go with this idea of we're no longer in a world of work-life balance. Back when I did publish books, I think it was 12 years ago in Control Alt Delete, I talked about a very squiggly life, that there's this interflowing, that it's not about balance, it's about flow. And finding that flow can be very unique. At the time, the analogy I would often talk about is Seth Godin, who tells this story of being somewhere for a speech, somewhere with tropical weather and palm trees and beaches. And it was later in the evening, and he was sitting in the lobby just doing some email and didn't want to sit in his room, I guess. And a couple came by and kind of leered at him like, oh, poor guy, he's in all this beauty. And here he sits doing his email. And his reaction was something along the lines of, I actually feel worse for you because you wait all year for this 1 week to be happy. I'm happy all the time type of thing. And it was a really good story about it. But I wonder if there is this world where people look for this idea of work-life balance, or people are just understanding better that there not only isn't anything like that, but there might not have ever really been.
Well, pretty profound intro to our discussion. I think, Mitch, one of the things we need to separate first are the individuals whom treat work like a job and thus a paycheck, and they're not looking for any sort of existential meaning or sense of purpose. And there's lots of folks like that. It's just like, hey, I go in, I punch out, I go home. And their sense of meaning and worth, etc., is not at work. It is outside of work. And so for them, work-life balance really becomes sort of a suggestion that it doesn't even need to happen because I don't think of it as a balance because I'm so disciplined to think that work is just the place where I get paid and I don't need anything more from it. So I'm just going to, go home afterwards and find meaning and fulfillment there. But there is a very significant portion of the working population that does want and yearns for a sense of meaning and fulfillment and even self-actualization, or at least in part from their work. And when it feels as though that it becomes a work imbalance equation, then I take umbrage with that. But I think the millions of people that have been told, whether by the corporate values or by their leader, that they support this notion of work-life balance, I think they're being fed a lie, if not a myth. And that's creating a lot of, at least in part, the the personal issues. So, I mean, you know this, right? The increase in anxiety societally, the increase in loneliness, increase in boredom, which is actually a good thing, the increase in stress, in burnout, all these things being tracked since basically the mid aughts. There's got to be some sort of correlation here, right, between this work imbalance theory that I have and the people who, again, are yearning, striving for something better than this notion of work-life balance. So I think the indicators are there, Mitch, and that's what I'd love to dig into. No pun intended.
Do you wonder if they're created by individual? This idea of what is my purpose? Where do I sit in the hierarchy of things? What's the world like? Or is there, to me at least, it feels like there's this tremendous downward pressure from society. Look no further than what inflation has done to the cost of food, people's ability to buy affordable housing, what's happening in the world that might perhaps push people in two directions. One is that I have to find this type of work that can, really financially keep me alive and my family alive. And that perhaps there's also this other side world where, we saw the great resignation, all these things come out of COVID, where people realized, well, I need, like, there's this, it seems to me that there's always these two opposing forces that are smashing into each other when we talk about work-life balance or what the state of work is. On one hand, you're like, wow, it's really not affordable to live. And if this were me, time warp back to when I first started working, I don't know if I'd have the courage to quit any job because I have to get by and try and survive. And I remember very much what it was like to be invited to a friend's wedding and be upset because I couldn't afford the gift, versus now you have people who are in that phase of their lives, but are quitting or not willing to do the things people would have typically done to get the things that people ultimately want. There are a lot of interesting, maybe psychological, maybe sociological things at play here.
Well, where do we start? So on the human being side, if there's a perpetual or constant quest for more, the keeping up with the Joneses, being sucked into the vortex of marketing campaigns that thou must have a new iPhone every year or a new watch or what have you. Like, there is a consumerism, commercialism drug that is hooked from a lot of people. Take that aside for a second, and just to your point, you've got a situation in which rentflation is through the roof, that so many Gen Zs and millennials have effectively given up on the ability or dream of owning a home, let alone a condo. I mean, a house versus a condo. And so the cost of living, when you kind of look at COLA compared mid 90s to today, is, as you've pointed out, like, is astronomically different. And in this notion of kind of the always on, always adaptable, always there, gig economy, let's use Fiverr, et cetera, kind of mantra, you've got people who are working and then, as you've pointed out, also working in these gigs to sort of make ends meet. And, you have to kind of ask yourself, if you're a senior leader on the executive team of some mid-size, if not large organization, what the hell are we doing?
Right.
Like, are we purposely trying to create a society in which not only is there a haves and have-nots, but really, 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 really well off and not off, not even on.
Yeah, not on. Yeah.
And that's kind of what it feels like. So how
That
can you ever have work-life balance if you're just trying to survive and make ends meet?
And that's, I mean, there's other factors there too that we'll talk about, things like artificial intelligence and what the near to short term might look like for that in the economy. It's a strange thing when you factor this all in, because people ultimately do want to do the work. But if there is
Mm.
no middle class, that creates there's a vacuum there, which we've been talking about. The death of the middle class has been something that it's probably about a decade and a half, I would think, that we've been talking about it, probably much longer. Do you look at this and think it's amazing that we would go through COVID or go through these economic cycles and still and have such a different approach that we have to work, if you know what I mean? It is, to me, that's the most surprising thing. The disconnect that there is between the real crisis of the economy and your ability to buy a home and afford groceries against this, I need to work when it works for me. Because there is a lot of that in the world. And I'm not trying to belittle those who don't have those choices or those who have so much they don't have to worry about it. But there is a large swath of the employed economy right now that is a very different perspective, that they see themselves as gig workers even when they're fully employed, that they see themselves as, if I did this contract or this project well within the organization as an FTE, I can ask or get the raise, whatever. Like, there is this weird thing happening there as well, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, and that, like, things like, do I trust my employer comes out. Are they speaking double speak? And this fear of, organizational growth for the sake of growth is
Shareholder
really, I
value.
think, yeah. I mean, how many examples do we need to see? Let's look at Meta just for a second, Mitch, to the point, right? So Zuckerberg points out in 2023 at the beginning-ish of the year that will be the year of efficiency. And the year of efficiency results in, by the end of 2023, 20,000 jobs were terminated. Now, you can make the argument, obviously, as we would with our little strategic hats on, saying, okay, where are the inefficiencies? Where are we ineffective as an organization? Where's the redundancy? Did we bloat and grow too much? Like, what do we need 20,000 people? Okay. So let's just say that probably they were bloated and that there was probably some effectiveness to look at. I don't know if 20,000 was the number or not, but let's just say it wasn't. The shareholders whom saw the exits of 20,000 people, and thus the analysts that prop up Wall Street, sort of took a look at it, and by the end of 2023 said, yeah, we believe in this organization, and the stock price went up 200%.
Yeah. So
And
let's
one more thing, hold on,
yeah.
one more thing, because your point is well taken. Shareholder primacy is actually at times the root of all evil. And so what did Facebook / Meta announce in their annual review in Q1 of 2024? Two things: their first ever dividend and a $50 billion share buyback. And for those that don't know shareholder primacy, of which your audience is pretty smart, so they probably do, where does the $50 billion come from? Their profits. So if you're now a Meta employee that has been terminated, and now let's just say, you're thinking about the rent you might have to pay, the house mortgage you're paying, whatever, your kids, and you're like, so you could have kept me, but you chose to give $50 billion back to shareholders so as to play stock market Cirque du Soleil, so that there's less of a float out there, and now we can actually rig the system, the stock market system again, to get greater returns in 2024, 2025. That is terrible stuff, Mitch.
Yeah, and it's Cirque du Soleil in terms of PR as well. It came very closely coordinated with the 20th anniversary of Meta, or Facebook as it's known. Came hot on the heels of an inquiry that was happening on Capitol Hill that forced Zuckerberg to stand up and apologize to parents of kids who have been harmed or who committed suicide or other tragedies befall them because of what social media's impact was. And this thing gets announced, and Mark's net worth increases by something close to $30 billion personally, between what would have essentially been you hearing of these quarterly earnings, having your coffee with that, and then having lunch. That's how much his net worth increased at that time. And yeah, I think there's obviously a big story here about pay gaps, which we talk a lot about. There's a big story here in terms of this fairness of the things you described, and again, this vast amount of wealth that's being powered. But there doesn't. It seems like people like you and I will talk about it, and maybe even not as fiercely as some who is much more of the employee advocate, whether it's union based or people in government or beyond. But there doesn't really seem to be this rally in the stock market or capitalism at all to have any idea of how to fix this, how to reinstate some type of middle class. And there just doesn't seem to be a desire other than people like us who would philosophize that this probably isn't the best strategy.
It's not. I mean, we're not making a difference, Mitch.
Yeah, they didn't read the book and just do it. I can't believe it.
Well, I wonder, though, if we're at sort of one of those generational breakpoints, right? Where you and I, as card-carrying members of the Gen X population, I do wonder, though, what our kids, whether they're Zeds or even our young millennial friends, is there at some point where, the meme of shareholder primacy, or at least, even something more tangible, like y'all are a bit ironical with your work-life balance nonsense. So can we just get back to what it is that we'd like to do, which is live a good life? Can we get back to that? I wonder if Gen Z and millennials are more apt to actually do something about it. Whereas I feel, not speaking for you, but Gen X often subservient to the boomers. And we were kind of like, in the way and not really flag bearing for change.
Yeah. I was recalling a TikTok that I had seen the other day while I was preparing for our conversation and reading Work Life Bloom. And there's this young staff member, and this went very viral because the boss was being interviewed and said that she had an employee that refused to attend an 8 a.m. meeting because they were booked to go to the gym. And you can imagine my aghast at that. When you run an agency like I did in particular, you'll have a pitch and people are coming to work the next day while others are there with a towel on one shoulder and a toothbrush in the other hand because they were up all night preparing for the pitch. I mean, it's very common in trying to win new business and trying to help things thrive. And you'd hear that story and think like, wow, young people today, they're just not motivated. And this young person actually came out on TikTok and defended their actions, saying things like, I'm only employed to work from 9 to 5. I wasn't given enough notice for this meeting. I had already booked a class at the gym. Is someone willing to pay for that time for the gym? Will I be paid for that additional hour that I'll be coming to work? And regardless of where I sit on how I would feel about this, I can tell you that the comments were very telling. You could really see this delineation of how we perceive work and how we perceive our own personal movement forward in our professional development. And it was so astounding that I found myself with my head spinning, thinking if even my own beliefs were real or if I had become, person A on the balcony shaking fist at clouds.
Reminds me in 2002, which is 20 plus years from this recording, at least.
Yeah.
I had shifted over from academia, Mitch, to join the ranks of the dark side in corporate America. And I worked for a high tech firm that at the time had about 3,000 people globally. I was its new role, called its global head of learning and development. And I had been there for about 2 weeks, and then I got a new boss, a VP from Atlanta. And they joined us at headquarters in Vancouver, British Columbia. So, new boss, old boss gone. And about 2 weeks of niceties on a Thursday after after his second week of being my VP and thus my direct boss, I'm leaving for the end of the day on a Thursday from the office. And he's a boomer, by the way. And as I'm going past his desk, because it's kind of open concept, but his desk was near the elevator where everyone had to come and go, right? He pulls me over. And, and I love Americans, but he's got that American kind of drawl. It's like, Pontefract, come here. So I go over and I was like, hi. And he does the fake kind of looking down at his wrist, and he's got a watch there, but he doesn't. And he's like doing that fake thing, like kind of like, do you know what time it is? And then he literally said, hey, do you know what time it is? I said, I do. As it turns out, it's 4:30. In fact, Mitch, I said 4:30, which confused him. So I had to translate. It said
you were talking in kilometers. He was talking in miles. I got you.
Pretty much, yeah. And then, awkward pause. And he says, so don't you think it's kind of early for you to be leaving? And then I took another look at him, and I did the Canadian takedown.
I'm sorry?
Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No. The Canadian takedown, where I look at his feet, pretend they're skates, come back up. I'm about to cross-check him with an imaginary hockey stick. And I said, hey, you have any idea what time I came in today? He said, no. And I said, well, that's because I came in 90 minutes before you at 7:30. And I do that every day because I'm an early starter. And then he looked at me aghast. He's like, I had no idea. And I said, well, now you do. And I walked out. I never got fired. I put him in his place. Why do I tell that story? Because what I see in that TikTok video that I also saw, and I also saw, the follow-up to that, yeah, is that if we don't have empathy as leaders to understand what people are going through generationally, age-wise, society-wise, home-wise, state-wise, whatever case may be, Mitch, then we're just not very good human beings, if not leaders. And so in that particular example, again, I find that there's this quite awesome exemplary situation of which we need to better understand what Gen Z's going through. Because if they have been programmed by their parents who happen to possibly be Gen X to take into consideration a more harmonious work-life integration where working out at 8 is actually awesome and important, then maybe somewhere along the way the leaders have lost the plot. Now, would I personally go to TikTok and riff like that? Probably not. But I think what we're getting at is this: do we understand where people are coming from? And if we don't, maybe we should be having better discourse and dialectical conversations about it.
Do you think performance has anything to do with how the senior person acted in this? Meaning, if this was a star player, would it be treated the same as if this person was somewhat on the fence or maybe underperforming?
I think
we don't have a lot of details in this story, so I want to be clear that it's not, we're giving examples, but we don't know if this person is one of the best employees, one of the worst employees, a newbie who wasn't understanding the culture, and the culture is very different. Maybe someone didn't do enough investigation in the office. That's the type of work environment it is. There's a lot of factors here that I don't want to underplay or overplay.
I think it could. I think there's definitely, any organization has A, B, C's, and F's in terms of players, right? And I have no idea what this particular individual was. I think it could have been a bit of self hubris, potentially, right? Like, hey, I'm good. I'm going to go out. No one's going to touch me anyway. But then again, I'm not sure any leader, regardless of how old they are, whether they're 25 or 95, want to be called out publicly, so to say. Right. So I think there's this situation again when you go back to empathy, whether it's cognitive, emotional, or sympathetic empathy. I think leaders need to seriously understand how a medium like TikTok has become the Greek agora, Mitch. It has become the soapbox of which I will pontificate and ask for opinion and even support. I don't think Zeds and millennials actually look to TikTok as a way in which to vehemently oppose their boss or their organization. It's literally a Greek agora. I think they're just going back, a couple thousand years and using it that way.
Yeah. It's an interesting argument too to think about work, because that one TikTok with that Stitch follow up, it does give you perspective. It's a look into the looking glass of what people face. And I think the macro thing that's happened there, and I do believe it's somewhat of a reaction to everything that's happened in workforce culture post COVID, is a little bit of this idea that we're suddenly in a place where we have to personalize work for the
Mm,
individual. And I do liken it to pharmaceuticals. It used to be this old thing we would say, oh, you have a headache, take 2 extra strength ibuprofen. And the question you would always have is, well, men and women are genetically, biologically different. Age might play a factor. This, and the world was like, no, 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 just take two and everyone's the same. And then as we're now developing, and we're not there yet, obviously, but this idea of really having chemicals structured to the best of its ability to perform, as your body will be very different than mine in terms of blood, DNA, et cetera, et cetera. That is the panacea of what we're trying to do here. But I feel in a certain way that this movement towards this personalization of work for each player and how they fit and where they are may in fact lead to a really serious problem around two areas. One would definitely be efficiencies and how we metric and scale that. But the second one would be culture. That
mhm.
is it easy or hard to build a culture placating to all of this? So I'll give you the counter, which would be I'm Dan Pontefract, and I like to come in at 7:30 and start getting things done. And there's a group of us here. In fact, most of us are here. I used to talk about it in relation to the live to work or work to live. I had offices in two very different cities. 5 p.m., the place was a ghost town in one city. 5 p.m. in the other, it was time to start working and get into
Mm.
the real stuff and break out the wine and the beer carts and socialize. So there are all of these things happening. And when I see these stories, I think more about the business, the brand, the culture, and wonder how do you move it forward if everybody is so self aware and self involved in what work needs to be for them?
Perhaps because of our glorious choice of haircuts, Mitch, your notion in Control Alt Delete about sort of the squiggly line, the squiggly notion is actually quite apt to this point. So I'll bring back your thinking, and that is, I think the squiggly line culture is also an important thing to sort of move forward 12 years later from your book in the notion of I've always seen, and I've worked for very large global behemoths, that any organization is a culture of cultures, first and foremost.
Yeah.
But now, in this added layer of post COVID, um, the morals and values of Gen Z and millennials that are making, I argue, the organization better, that we indeed do need to be thinking about that squiggly line personalization of what work means to people. And I think when we, as an example, when we adjudicate the culture of any organization annually through these godforsaken employee engagement surveying, we're just saying, hey, you know y'all agree with how the culture is, and we don't take into consideration factors that are going on, whether their life or their work, for them, and then we mush them all together and say, hey, our corporate employee engagement score is 52% this year. Last year it was 58. We're down 6 points. Why is that? I don't know, because we're idiots. Well, we're not. What happened? Like maybe 10% of your organization left that were high performers. Maybe 5% of your organization had babies and their lives changed. Maybe 2% of your organization lost a parent.
Wasn't
Maybe,
it something like at COVID? I hate to interrupt, but there was a big one where I think post COVID, there was a number, I could be wrong, 8 to 12%. I don't know what it was. Can't physically do it because they actually moved to another city. Like there was
yes.
something where like it was a staggering choice, not like, I got a baby and I don't want to. It was like, I'm no longer there.
Physically cannot work because I'm no longer there. You're like, so shouldn't you factor this into your employee engagement scoring people? I mean, it's not rocket science, but it really irks me, honestly. Like we're into a really good rabbit hole, I'd call it right now, Mitch, you and I. And I always love chatting with you off camera as I do on camera. But we gotta start asking ourselves, like, what is the culture we want, the espoused culture and the actual culture, and do we recognize differentiation for people? And if not, come on, like vanilla is not going to cut it for everyone. Yes, there needs to be a core, but I do believe that tailoring and customization and personalization it's just far more required than we've ever thought of than before. And like, let's look at it to technology, Mitch. So the recommendations that I get on Netflix are probably a little bit different than yours.
You have a lot more porn for sure.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
joking.
Denise, I'll blame Denise in the account. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
But you see, that's the point, is that we've gone into this world of algorithmic customization, and then we look in the organization, we want to make everybody like Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. It's like you have to be on the rote assembly line of everyone doing the same thing with the widgets. Like, come on, Mitch.
But again, there's so many interesting things happening at work. One of the core things we would talk about, and we still talk about this, by the way, and some people are being punished for this, and some people are being praised for this, is the gamification of work. Adrian Hahn wrote a great book. He was on the show You've Been Played, looking at mostly the negative aspects of gamification. But hey, if you even look at a hierarchy, I'm now a manager. I'd like to be a director. I'd like to be there. Everything has this gamification. I would even make the argument that gamification has many positive aspects to it. But you can think about it in that way and go, well, it's kind of a weird thing. Amazon extremely punished for their gamification of people's productivity in the warehouse, for sure. And I'm laughing only because it feels more like the Charlie Chaplin or Lucy with the chocolate factory trying to gobble up as many chocolates as she can. But it's funny that even something like that, which would pierce into your point exactly, it has this double sword where people are thinking, for our culture, we have to make it engaging. So we need levels, we need lateral movements, we need these types of, it's all a form of gamification. It's a manifestation of how it comes out and the product of it. I'm sure people at corporate Amazon love the gamification of that process and how I can quickly escalate myself to the C-suite.
Amazon pivot. The gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? Well, there's another one for you. So back to engagement. So when organizations put on their annual employee scorecard, the team's employee engagement score, and you're like, hold on a second here. So if I have a 100% scorecard that's going to help me get a bonus for that year in March, and 10% is allocated to our team's employee engagement score. So let me do the intuitive math on this one, Mitch. So if I'm the leader and my scorecard is also effectively going to be enhanced by that 10%, do you think maybe there'll be a little bit of teaching to the test going on, Mitch, with the employee engagement survey?
Yeah, it's high school. Like, should I do the extra homework correction on this test? It's a mathematical equation of whether or not I'm going to rewrite that test or not.
So to your point, I think we could co-write a book. We get you back on the prose
publishing trail. Yeah.
gamification of the corporate enterprise. That's basically what's happening.
But what is interesting in all this is you're not going to read a book like Work Life Bloom, roll your eyes and go, this doesn't make, I mean, it makes perfect sense from the factors of work that you lay down, the 6 factors of work to the 6 factors of life. You look at this and go, well, Dan's pretty much providing a model for both the leader and the employee of how to have a healthy ecosystem between the two. And I couldn't disagree with that. It's exactly what the book delivers on. And I believe we're living out right now what could potentially be the greatest example of that, which is you have businesses that are still 2024 looking at things like return to office. So let's put that aside for a second. Let's just totally put it aside. But I would say, what is, we don't even probably know how people feel about their job satisfaction today. There's probably a myriad of people who test this with different levels of efficacy and science behind it or whatever. But I think it is safe to say that if we were going to think of work-life bloom as the perfect place of where we could be in work, now would be the exact time to know it. Because you do have office, you have remote, and you have hybrid. In theory, you've given people so many more choices. There are as many interesting jobs out there as there were because of what happened during the pandemic. Jobs shifted, new jobs were created. Others clearly were gone as well. It seems like it's a bit more of the employees' marketplace than the employers still, a little bit. I would suspect based off of that, you would see a massive gain in the level of satisfaction of employees. And I don't know where it's at, but if we can't get it from there, what hope do we have?
Well, I guess that's the point, is that I don't think there ever will be an increase in satisfaction, blooming, engagement, call it what you will, right? I'm just ripping the Band-Aid off and calling it something different. So I don't believe that in any culture you're going to have anywhere near kind of that 30 to 40% people feeling pretty good about their place of work. It's not going to happen.
Which is wild if you think that the options are more boundless than they've ever been. That's kind of my point too.
Yeah, and I would say that again, we're individuals at the end of the day. How I felt in 1998 to 2002 is different than I felt from 02 to 08. Was much different between 08 and 11, was much different than 11 to 14, and then 14 to 18. And that year of 18 was a disaster for me. So here I am now 25 plus years working in organizations, and now for myself for the past 5 years. And I can tell you, I have been up, down, around, average, down, up, down, average, back up, and then back down. So right. If I'm now a 52-year-old and I'm thinking about those times around the sun in the corporate world, and I worked in academia, high tech, telecom, and for myself, kind of 4 gigs, I'm like, you know what? In hindsight, yeah, that's about par for the course, Mitch. And so if you're a Gen Z listening to Mighty Mitch's 6 Pixels podcast here, like you have to realize and accept that there's going to be ups and downs and there's going to be averages. And you're never going to be fully engaged until the age of 90, right? You're never going to be.
I got 5 years left. Now's the chance to dive in and really, really go for it. I was curious about your perspective on boundaries, because as you unlock this idea of work-life bloom, I believe the way in which you're going to scale that in terms of both those factors, all 12, would be the understanding of not just your own boundaries. I think that's actually the problem we have, is most people are thinking only about their own boundaries and not about the boundaries of their employer or the business that the employer works for. So I almost thought of it as a trifecta. You have the corporate boundaries, you have your leader, your person you report to, their boundaries, and you have your individual boundaries. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that as we set off into what I called flow at the time? There's no work-life balance. There's just this flow of your life and how you're going to put your time and attention on things.
Yeah, I mean, one of those 12 that I speak to, which ends the book actually, is respect. And so you have to respect yourself You have to respect your leader and the team for the things that they've got to do, and then kind of overall the organization, like what it's hopefully standing for and your contribution to it. But it does start with you first. I mean, you have to sort of take life and work into your own hands. And if you are being disrespected and you're disrespecting yourself, I mean, you've got to have some hard conversations. To your point of boundaries, Mitch, that's kind of, it starts there for me at least. And when you when you're not putting yourself first, I mean, I do believe that people have to get selfish on this one. And you feel as though there isn't that respect for yourself and the things that you're doing. If you feel that you have to, by example, right, answer that phone call in the middle of your 10-year-old's birthday on the Wednesday when you're just about to sing happy birthday and it's 6:30 and that boss called you or whatever, you're not respecting yourself. And I think we can go on ad infinitum about the number of examples that you have to ask yourself, well, who do I stand for? How do I want to be known to myself when I look in the mirror in the morning? And so boundaries to me are both important to set, but also to respect, to understand at times where the give and the take is on those relationships of self to self, obviously, to the leader, to your team members, the organization writ large.
I think when boundaries are clear and others understand boundaries, it also creates a tremendous amount of opportunity. Not
Mm,
that I would be the one more inclined to answer that phone at the birthday party, but I do remember at one point saying, I may not have my own boundaries because I am nowhere yet. And
mm.
perhaps I need to, instead of fighting the wave, maybe float with it a little bit. And I might get hit by a rock or have a branch stick me in the side a little bit from time to time, but maybe I need that a little bit. Maybe I need to get my butt kicked. Maybe I need for somebody to really tell me what to do. And instead of me pushing back against it, because I'm a metalhead and a punk lover from day one, which was my gut reaction. And I actually think that when I did that in the late 80s, early 90s, it helped me advance my career a lot more. It gave me much clearer perspectives. It's almost like I removed myself from it and
Mm.
acted like a third party supervisor of this and thought, fair or not fair, I got to try to push a little bit and get forward here. And I wonder how many times in life we might miss that moment of greatness because we didn't allow that great coach to have us do the things we didn't think we were capable of, or had another perspective on us. And maybe they're not great at communicating it, but you feel it. And not that I worry about that so much, but I do think of what might be lost if the experienced are now listening to those who have never, and perhaps taking on too much of what in the general consensus might be called the wokeness of the world, and and what that might lead to. I don't mean politically, but I mean this idea
I know.
of I know what's best for me. And my answer is you might not. You might not. And perhaps that leader doesn't have the best delivery and they may not be the kindest or have a personality similar to yours, but indeed has the business's best interest at heart, and at the same time perhaps has already seen people like you and has turned those people into lead. I don't know. I'm being somewhat superfluous to get to the point that it's not so straightforward, any of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think a little sandpaper is important in one's growth, one's career, one's life. I'll give you an example back to said boss who looked at the watch and said, it's 4:30. So about a month later, same boss pulls me aside. He sort of did a little joke. He's like, I'm not asking you why you're leaving. I said, what's up, man? And he's like, I just
You're
asked you a
fired. No,
question.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Do I asked you a question? He said, I've been here 6 weeks, and your team is 20 people, and you have two team members in Denver, two team members in Florida near Orlando. He said, how come you haven't visited them? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you haven't talked to me about going to visit them, and it looks like you started 2 weeks before me, so it's been 8 weeks. and you haven't done anything to go visit them. Don't you think you should go see them face to face? Again, this is fall of 2002. I'm like, huh? So you like, there's no WebEx or Zoom or Teams back then, right? It's just con calls. You're like, you've just been on the phone with them, right? I said, oh yeah, a lot. He's like, go visit them. And it was such a surreal hammerhead for me. But he was right. And that's the sandpaper I'm talking about. And that was the respect I still had for my boss, even though I might have called him out on the weirdness of the I leave early at 4:30, but he was totally right. And sure enough, booked a flight out there in 2 weeks' time and did the Denver Orlando run to go meet these 4 team members. That's like sandpaper. So I had to respect my boss still for that feedback. Otherwise, I probably would never have got off my ass in Vancouver to go visit those 4.
Yeah. That's amazing how you think about work today. This idea of I'm not going back into the office, or I don't want to go to the all staff meeting in Cancun. There are certain things that, again, I might be balcony fisting, shaking fist at clouds, or fisting clouds, I guess was my other interpretation of it. But, I do believe that there is something when physical beings are together. You and I both love music, and you know that. You can listen to one of the greatest albums you've ever loved, but something magical happens when you're in another location with the band that's in another location, and they happen to be playing to you, and you're in the audience. There's something magical that happens there, and I wonder if we're not losing a lot of that because of this pushback to office, this pushback to gathering. It's strange.
Just touched on something that I hadn't really thought of, and that rather than systemic return to office 5 days a week or mandated X number of days a week, I wonder if it could be turned into, like, metaphorically, of course, like a concert series or a tour where you show up at the office and you're there for an intention. And that intention might be training, it might be celebration, it might be just, hanging, it might be a way in which that you sort of see, Death Cab for Cutie and the Postal Service and a double bill together, metaphorically, in the office with people. And maybe that'll help, like, all generations.
Yeah.
Like, there's a purpose and an intent to being there.
The ones that are trying that, the general consensus, it's not exact, is when we do that, people are socializing way more than working, which isn't wrong. They like that, but there is no output or productivity on those days. That's the challenge with it. So you might get some great ideas or people doing things, but ultimately it's almost like it's Monday morning all day for 2 days, which is great. But at one point, we got to get beyond Monday morning and into the work of Monday.
Right.
Talking about the weekend and what you haven't done and how's your family. I haven't seen you in so long, and we should have a drink and we should do this. So there is no doubt that it's great for culture building and it's great for brand building. The black belt thinking around it is, how do you integrate productivity into this and not lose another day of the week? These are really complex questions. It's funny because we're recording this in 2024. And we're still struggling with this fallout of work, which is super interesting. One of the things that I've heard as the great solution to this is helping our leaders be better coaches. Analogy, I've talked about this on the show before, is that if you had a great coach, you always want to show up for them. Now, whether that's in person, hybrid, virtual, it doesn't matter, but this feeling of, wow. And it's a high bar to expect every leader to be a great coach. You do coaching, you know how challenging it is to be a coach. But when I toss that out to you as a concept, leaders as coaches, what are your thoughts?
Well, human beings are coaches first, Mitch. I mean, every one of us are in the, I hope, pursuit of helping our brethren, our neighbor, our community, whatever we're a part of. Do we not wake up and sort of say, yeah, how am I going to help someone today? And that might be holding the door. That's a coaching moment. Like, you're empathic to that individual when you're going into a grocery store and saying, "Oh, I'll hold the door for you. Your bags look heavy." That's to me, that's coaching. It's about how you feel, how you engage, how you're doing something for someone else. So if I then answer your question more succinctly, Yes. Every leader ought to be thinking of themselves as a coach, not in the, Marshall Goldsmith, you need to get your, ICF degree, certification, whatever, right? I'm just talking about the principles of being a very good listener, allowing an opportunity to provide a soundboard, to be open, empathic, and even wise at times for that individual to feel and sense and believe that you're in support of their pursuits in the organization. And coaching is also something from a leader perspective, which again goes back to the sandpaper point, Mitch, is where that sandpaper can come up. That's where the constructive feedback and counsel. Dan, how come you haven't gone to Denver or Orlando? Don't you think that'd be a good idea to go meet those people face to face? That's coaching. So
Yeah.
it's all of that. It's the human piece, but it's also the sandpaper, I think, that's necessary for leaders in particular.
Yeah. So let's leave the most difficult concept or topic on this topic for last. Artificial intelligence. We are now taking all of these thoughts that we've debated and discussed and talked about and having to layer in a technology that is about to somewhat automate the knowledge worker a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's already proved in many instances, I know in my work it has, to be a real accelerant. I think there's one part of the narrative that is we're really good with technology and human beings adapt, and this isn't like any other technology. I have a bit of a question mark on that. I'm not sure that's feels like an easy answer. I do worry that in the long term we might be fine, but it's the midterm, which could be
Mm-hmm.
several years, if not a decade or more, that could create mass unemployment, mass struggles in understanding why we need humans in many, many jobs. There is no doubt that we'll see the integration of real automation robotics with this technology as well, which then might put into question even very high skilled expertise. I'm not expecting you to be the AI expert, Dan, here. I'll assume that role for this conversation for sure, but I'm sure you've read and had some thoughts about that. And how does that affect the impact of leaders and the work that they're doing? And perhaps Zuckerberg's entitled to 30 more billion by the time we finish our coffees and have lunch because he figured out a way for his company to do the work of, let's say, content moderation, which is the biggest threat facing them through these very highly attuned algorithms.
I think your point about Zuckerberg, if you sort of extrapolate on that for a second, is actually my point, and that is there's a benevolence versus malevolence argument to be had about AI in the workplace.
Yeah.
If on the malevolent side, we're thinking about leaders whom want to use it to simply extract any cost that can allow them to increase EBITDA by X percent. And they're doing so in a way that without them looking at society, but looking at it selfishly and only for either their own self-interest or the corporation's interests, then I worry. I worry a lot about the malevolence in the boards and the C-suite. And, Zuckerberg might be the card carrying member of that right now. On the benevolent side, I think there are good examples already of organizations that are looking to it as a way in which maybe to actually implement a 4-day work week. They've looked at it as guides or helpers or sidekicks to decrease the amount of anxiety, stress, burnout, loneliness, even, right, in certain situations. And that to me, I think, is where I hope and put my faith in humanity, is where we land, is that there's more benevolent leaders than there are malevolent. But the jury is definitely out, Mitch.
Yeah, my concern is that it starts with benevolence and quickly leads to unintentional malevolence. That's my concern with it.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're a Boston Dynamics and you're looking at your robots that are kicking footballs and running 100-meter dashes faster than Usain Bolt, and then some lovely, originally benevolent organization then was taken over by a malevolent dictator of some sort and said, actually, we're going to build the Star Wars drone army with these
Or we're just going to
individuals.
replace its head with a machine gun and see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, what could go wrong? Like, really,
Yeah.
Mitch?
Crazy. Dan, tell me the one thing that made you think differently.
Well, I'm actually not going to go to the book. I'm going to go to another book, and I've been thinking a lot about society and aging and what we might be doing with people who are 50 and older. So more like I'm in an itch to scratch mode, Mitch. And so recently, I read a book by Richard Reeves, and the book is called "Of Boys and Men." Sorry, and it is a book from, I think, 2021 or 2022, and it is to do with how, quote, the kind of modern male is struggling. And I am a feminist to a T. I love my girls. I love Denise. I love everything that we've done to support women, equality, and everything else you want to describe in that sentence, and to not belabor it. But I also think that we have to be thinking about what we're not doing for men. And I think that has some ripple effects as we're thinking about how society needs to continue to evolve. So that's my aha learning, shifting moment right now.
Love it. Dan, let people know what they can find out more about Work Life Bloom. Dan's also the author of Lead Care Win, Open to Think, The Purpose Effect, Flat Army, and has got a ton of content out there. Let people know what else you're doing, shows, podcasts, writing, whatever.
Well, the book can be found pretty easy, worklifebloom.com. You'll find out all kinds of free bits there, lots of free bits, a lot of free assessment to figure out if you're blooming or not. And if you're not, that's totally fine, people. I'm really digging deep, into this new notion of what I'm really calling the gray way, Mitch. Doesn't apply to you and I because we're never going to be gray with our lovely haircuts. But it is just hey, what are we doing? How can organizations prepare better to allow people to work longer, maybe not full time, kind of like giggers inside the organization, and really looking forward to that journey of mine.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Mitch, I can't tell you how awesome it is always to chat with you in these. Thank you for making me a return guest. That means a lot to me, but you're just a genuinely awesome thinker.